We are getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie.
One night in February, a single feature on a masked face above a stolen pair of garden plants put a private citizen's entire life on a collision course with one of the most chaotic missing persons cases this country has seen in years. Before we go any further, I need to say this clearly. This case involves a missing 84-year-old woman, blood evidence, and details some viewers may find disturbing. If that's not something you want in your feed right now, this is a good moment to step away. If you're still here, welcome to Cold Case News Nation. Hit subscribe before we get into it. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if this video does what it's supposed to do, share it with someone who needs to hear this story. Like the video too. It genuinely helps this channel keep doing the digging other outlets won't. Now let's go back to the night everyone forgot. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old, living alone in the Catalina foothills, just north of Tucson, Arizona. To most of the country, she was a private woman, known only because her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, sits behind the desk on NBC's Today Show every morning. To her family, she was simply mom and grandmother, someone with limited mobility but a sharp mind, someone who took daily medication and relied on a pacemaker to keep her heart steady. On the evening of Saturday, January 31st, 2026, Nancy had dinner with her daughter Annie Guthrie and Annie's husband, Tommaso. It was an ordinary family dinner. Nothing about it suggested anything was wrong. Sometime around 9:45 p.m., Nancy was dropped back at her own home. She walked inside. The garage door closed behind her. That is the last confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie. By Sunday morning, something was off. Nancy had plans to join a friend to watch an online church service, something she did regularly. She never showed up. She didn't answer her phone. Around noon on February 1st, her family reported her missing to the Pima County Sheriff's Department. What investigators found at her home gave them almost nothing to work with. There was blood on the porch, later confirmed to be hers. Her doorbell camera, the one piece of technology that should have captured whoever came near that house, had been physically disconnected. And because Nancy didn't have an active cloud subscription, the footage that should have been sitting on a server somewhere appeared to be gone. For investigators working a case where every hour mattered, that felt like losing the most important piece of evidence before the case had even properly started. Then came the ransom letters. At least 3 separate news organizations received notes claiming responsibility for Nancy's disappearance, each with a payment demand and a deadline attached. One deadline came and went on a Thursday. A second passed the following Monday evening. None of them could be verified. Adding to the noise, a man in California was separately arrested for mailing his own fake ransom note, unconnected to the real investigation, which only made it harder for the public to tell which leads were genuine. There's a detail that didn't get much attention in the early coverage, but matters more in hindsight. FBI Director Kash Patel later revealed that the Bureau was kept out of the investigation entirely for the first 4 days. Local and federal jurisdiction did not align immediately, and while Pima County deputies were the first on scene, the FBI's full resources weren't formally engaged until days had already passed. Days where evidence could have been collected, witnesses could have been spoken to, and a trail that was already cold was getting colder. Once the case went public, the volume of public response was enormous. Within the second week, the Sheriff's Department had logged close to 18,000 tips. On a single day after the case gained national attention, more than 4,000 tips came in within 24 hours. Hundreds of detectives and federal agents were assigned to the investigation. And still, for more than a week, there was almost no physical evidence beyond the blood on Nancy's porch and a missing 84-year-old woman who needed medication she did not now have with her. If you're the kind of person who needs to know how a case like this actually gets solved, not just the headlines, but the real timeline as it happens, this channel tracks every confirmed update in the Nancy Guthrie case as it develops. Subscribe now, because what happened 4 days later changed the entire direction of this investigation. For 10 days, The doorbell footage everyone assumed was lost sat untouched, not on Nancy's device, but somewhere on the back end of the camera company's own servers. Investigators worked directly with that company to pull residual data, the kind of recovery that doesn't show up in a courtroom drama, but is exactly how modern digital forensics actually works. A disconnected camera at the house doesn't always mean the footage is gone. Sometimes it just means the footage moved somewhere the original owner can no longer see. On Tuesday, February 10th, that recovery effort paid off. FBI Director Kash Patel released video and still images pulled directly from Nancy Guthrie's own front door camera. The footage showed a figure approaching the house wearing a mask, carrying a backpack, with gloves on, and a holstered handgun visible at the waist. The person's head stayed tilted down through most of the approach, avoiding the angle of the lens almost deliberately. At one point, the figure reached into Nancy's own yard, pulled up plants growing near her door, and held them in front of the camera, blocking the shot. It was the clearest evidence the investigation had produced in 10 days, and it was also the most unsettling because whoever this was clearly knew exactly where that camera sat. Savannah Guthrie posted the images herself within the hour. She wrote that someone out there had to recognize this person, that her family believed Nancy was still alive, and she asked whoever was watching to help bring her mother home. It was a personal appeal from a public figure, and it pushed the case into a different level of national attention almost overnight. That same evening, Kash Patel appeared on Hannity and said something that would end up shaping the next 12 hours far more than anyone realized at the time. He told the audience that investigators were not chasing a single lead. He said law enforcement was actively looking into multiple persons of interest in the search for Nancy Guthrie. Not one name. Several, all being worked through at once. That comment is the hinge this part of the story turns on, because what happened next did not come out of nowhere. While the images were still spreading across every news channel in the country, Pima County deputies pulled over a gray SUV on a road near Rio Rico, a small community about 60 miles south of Tucson, close to the Mexican border. The driver was a woman. Her husband, Carlos Palazuelos, was in the passenger seat. Within the hour, the sheriff's department posted a short statement confirming a subject had been detained in connection with the investigation. The reporting on exactly why Carlos was stopped has never fully lined up. Some outlets reported that his mother-in-law had been shown the doorbell images and told investigators his eyes looked similar to the masked figures. Other, later reporting from local Arizona stations, described Carlos being identified through what was called electronic investigative tools. Things like cell phone location data or automated license plate readers, rather than a visual resemblance alone. Both versions have been reported by named sources. Neither has been officially confirmed as the full explanation. And it's worth being honest about that uncertainty rather than picking the more dramatic version. What happened at the house that night is well documented. Federal agents and Pima County deputies obtained a court-authorized search warrant for the Rio Rico property where Carlos was staying. They broke down both the front door and the garage door to get inside. Carlos's mother-in-law, a woman named Josefina, was in the home when it happened. She told reporters that night that Carlos had nothing to do with Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, that he had no criminal record, no history of violence. She said investigators had shown her the doorbell photo and asked her to compare the clothing in the image to anything Carlos owned and that it didn't match. But she also confirmed that police had pointed to the eyes in that photo when they questioned her, a comment that would follow her son-in-law for weeks afterward, regardless of which explanation for his detention turns out to be the accurate one. According to his attorney, Carlos was held for somewhere between 5 and 7 hours, much of it in the back of a patrol car. By 1 a.m, the search was finished. Investigators left the property. Carlos Palazuelos was released without being charged with anything. What he said in the hours immediately after his release is where this story stops being about procedure, and that's exactly where we're headed next. Subscribe now if you want to hear it in his own words, because what Carlos told reporters that night raises questions about this investigation that still haven't been answered. Carlos went home that night to a house with a broken front door and a broken garage door, and reporters were already waiting outside. He gave at least 3 separate interviews within hours of his release, standing in front of the damage federal agents had just left behind. He told one Phoenix station that the only reason he understood for any of it was that his mother-in-law had been shown a photo of someone in a mask and that her son-in-law's eyes supposedly matched. He said the questioning itself was basic. They asked for his first name, his last name, his date of birth, and his social security number. When reporters asked if he had ever been to Nancy Guthrie's home, he didn't dodge the question. He said it was possible, that he didn't remember specifically, but that as a delivery driver working routes across Tucson for DoorDash and another delivery service, he had likely dropped packages on thousands of porches he couldn't recall individually. He said he had never heard of Nancy Guthrie before that night. A defense attorney named Ben Taylor, speaking publicly about the legal side of the stop, made a point that rarely gets attention in cases like this. He explained that police were within their rights to pull the vehicle over if they had reasonable suspicion, and that part of what happened was legally sound. But he also pointed out that Carlos had Fourth Amendment protections most people don't fully understand in the moment: the right to decline a search, the right to ask for a lawyer before answering anything. Carlos didn't do either. He answered every question they asked, voluntarily, because he believed full cooperation was his fastest way out of a situation he didn't understand. His attorney, Jesse Showalter, made one specific public request after all of it was over. He asked Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos to come forward and say plainly that Carlos was not a person of interest, that the department had made a mistake. That statement was never made. Not that week, not in the weeks after. Showalter later told reporters that Carlos had been handcuffed in the back of a patrol car for somewhere between 5 and 7 hours, and that his phone, seized the night of the search, still hadn't been returned to him weeks later. The aftermath for Carlos and his family went beyond the legal questions. He described being followed by a red truck while out making deliveries with his wife, the same truck showing up again the next morning. He said strangers had started taking photos of him and his family. He used the word scary, talking about what it had done to his wife and kids, a family still living in a house with a broken garage door, still needing to work the same delivery routes that had drawn attention to him in the first place. One detail that caused real confusion online deserves to be cleared up directly. There were 2 separate SUVs connected to this case around the same time. The gray SUV Carlos and his wife were driving the night they were stopped is one. The other is a completely different blue SUV that investigators later removed from inside Nancy Guthrie's own garage and towed away for examination. They are unrelated vehicles tied to unrelated parts of the investigation, despite some online discussion treating them as connected. The investigation kept moving without him. On February 14th, a second person was detained near the Catalina foothills, much closer to Nancy's own home, questioned, and released with almost no public attention by comparison. Separately, black gloves recovered near the scene were eventually traced by the sheriff's department to a restaurant worker with no connection to the case at all, a lead that was formally opened and just as formally closed. That contrast matters. Sheriff Nanos has publicly and officially cleared every member of the Guthrie family and their spouses, including Tommaso Cioni. Dominic Evans, another name that surfaced in public discussion around this case, has had his own account published through national outlets like the New York Times. Carlos Palazuelos, a man with no criminal record and no public platform, has received none of that. No statement, no clearance, just silence. Forensic psychologist Dr. Gary Brucato, who has analyzed this case publicly, has said that people who end up harmed in cases like this are statistically more likely to have some passing familiarity with the victim's property, someone who delivers packages, performs trade work, or otherwise has reason to be near the home. It's a profile that fits a far wider group of people than any one individual, and it's not an accusation against anyone specifically named in this investigation. This is the part of the story most coverage walked away from. We're not walking away from it. Subscribe to stay with the people this case left behind, because what's happened in the months since tells you exactly how unfinished this story still is. More than 4 months after Nancy Guthrie vanished, the case is still open, and the investigation has only intensified rather than gone quiet. The reward for information leading to her safe return now stands at $1.2 million, raised from the original $1 million the Guthrie family offered back in February, a sign that despite everything investigators have gathered, they still need the public's help to close this case. The FBI's forensic work has continued in the background. Mixed DNA recovered from Nancy's home is still being analyzed, and as of the most recent reporting, no match has been found in any national criminal database. That includes DNA tied to the black gloves found near the scene, gloves the sheriff's department has since confirmed belonged to a local restaurant worker entirely unrelated to the case. A lead that opened and closed without bringing investigators any closer to an answer. In recent weeks, a woman was arrested near Nancy's own home as part of what authorities are describing as an intensifying effort to develop new leads. A development still unfolding as this video is being made. Separately, a cybersecurity firm called Certic has publicly floated a theory describing Nancy's disappearance as what it calls a wrench attack by proxy, tied to a $6 million Bitcoin ransom demand. That theory has circulated widely online, but it has not been confirmed by the FBI or Pima County investigators, and it should be treated as an outside analysis rather than an established fact of the case. Sheriff Chris Nanos has remained publicly engaged throughout, and in his most recent comments, he stated plainly that he believes an arrest will eventually be made in this case. It's a confident statement from the person closest to the investigation, but 4 months in, it remains a belief rather than a result. Savannah Guthrie returned to the Today Show desk on April 6th, after weeks away from her job, while her mother remained missing. In conversations since her return, she's spoken openly about how difficult it's been to come back to work without resolution, describing the difficulty of holding things together while still showing up every morning. It's a detail that puts a human face on a case that, for most of the country, exists only as headlines. Separately, human remains were discovered near Nancy's home in recent weeks. As of the most recent reporting, authorities have not confirmed any connection between those remains and Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, and that uncertainty is worth stating plainly rather than speculating further. And Carlos Palazuelos, the man whose name was once the most searched term in the country, remains exactly where he was in February. As far as any public record shows, Pima County has never issued the statement his attorney asked for. He was never charged, he was never officially named, and he has never been cleared, not in writing, not on camera, not in any official capacity. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The case is still open. And somewhere in that gap between reasonable police work and an unanswered request from a private citizen is a story this country has mostly moved past but shouldn't have. If you want to know the moment Pima County finally says something, on Carlos or on Nancy, subscribe now and drop a comment telling us what you think should happen next.